Friends and fellow citizens, welcome to the podcast. Today I sat down with Dr. Tom Balistrieri. Tom is currently a professor of psychology at the Worcester Polytechnic Institute, or WPI. Tom's had a pretty varied career. He started out as a therapist. He's worked as a director of counseling at different schools. He's worked as a business consultant. He's been a dean of students. He was previously an NCAA Division I coach at Mississippi State. He's even worked as a lobsterman. Tom has spent quite a bit of time over the years learning about coming-of-age procedures and ceremonies with the Lakota Indians out of South Dakota, and he's earned their respect and carries on many of their traditions today. I think you'll find what he has to say pretty interesting and pretty timely. And without further ado, I give you Dr. Tom Balistrieri. So we're here today to talk about your experience with initiation, and if you can tell us what is initiation? What are we talking about today?
Initiation has to do, and I focus with young men, has to do with helping men become balanced, and that means physically, spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, socially, balanced people of integrity and character, something that's obviously missing in our culture. So initiation was a means for societies around the world, as far back as we can tell, where when young boys reached the age of 9, 10, 11, 12, started talking back to their mother or stepping on ants or whatever you want to call it, would be yanked into the desert or the jungle or the woods, where they taught them something else. The fear was that if a young boy was left unattended, then he would have no sense of the sacred.
So when you look at older civilizations, there are specific examples of those types of initiations.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at different indigenous peoples,
right,
which you've had a bit of experience with,
right,
you see examples of that. What did we have in more modern Western society that we no longer have?
My belief, and it is just my belief, based on my 30 years of experience with this, is that we never really had anything. We think that going into the military, for example, is initiation, or going into college is initiation, or going into the Boy Scouts is initiation. But it's really not that. There are key components of initiation. Probably the most key component is this idea of the sacred. We've come to define sacred as having to do with religion or with God. But sacred really infers anything that is worth respect, anything that is worth nonviolence, anything that is worth love and compassion, anything that is worth the word obeisance, which people don't even know what it means anymore. But the idea that it's worth bowing to, not in the sense of you're more powerful than me, but again out of respect, when you shake a hand or put your hands together like a Buddhist might and bow in front of somebody. So it's understanding that every person is sacred, everything in nature is sacred. So there's this, what I learned was this first law of initiation, sometimes called lore, which is never speak poorly of yourself. When I've presented this lore to groups of people, I'll ask them, are you willing to give that a shot? To never speak poorly of yourself, to never hit yourself with a baseball bat and go, I am so awful, or I am so terrible. A significant portion of the audience can't even imagine that. So I try to say, well, look, like I'm 10 pounds overweight, and I can make the statement, I'm overweight, and then work towards losing the 10 pounds. That's okay. But if I go, I'm so fat, I'm so ugly, I'm so stupid, this is what cultures, again, around the world feared, that young people would start to be violent towards themselves. And when you're violent towards yourself, it's easier to be violent towards others, to be violent towards nature, for other people to go, wow, I guess you are stupid or you are fat, for them to be violent to you. And so again, the first law of initiation was love yourself. Don't speak poorly of yourself. And that's the jumping off place for initiation. The jumping off place was you're sacred. You're worthy of respect, compassion, nonviolence, kindness. But that's something we've lost.
So if that's the jumping off point, then what's the next step?
The next step is to then have that young person really practice that and go into nature. So oftentimes a person was yanked into, like I said, the jungle or the desert or whatever it might be. And for men, it was to learn this thing called feminine tones. Now, a lot of men have trouble with that. But what we mean by tones, it's not about acting like a woman. It's about understanding things like compassion or kindness or gentleness, appreciation, savoring. There's a classic story. It used to be in some nations in North America where a young boy, let's say 12 or 13, was told, we want you to follow this deer, this baby deer for about a year. So the boy got to know the fawn. He kind of fell in love with it, if you will. He saw it with its mom and its dad. He watched it in nature, and he built relationship with this fawn. At about 1 year, he would be told, now you need to kill this fawn, but you need to use every part of it. Now, of course, the young boy most likely cried or said, I don't want to do that. I care for this being. What the boy learned was that this was a living being with a soul, with heart, with a family, but he was made to do it. The boy in that moment understood life and death, appreciated life and death, used every part of that fawn for whatever it might be, for food and for its hide to make moccasins. But the important part was that when that boy grew older and went hunting, and if he saw 5 deer, it wasn't like, hey, I'm going to shoot all 5 of them. Or if it was a tree, I'm going to cut down a tree because I need it. I'm not going to take this chainsaw, if you will, and cut down all the trees just because it's kind of fun and it feels good and I love the sound of the chainsaw. When you understand relationship, you understand that everything is sacred. You only take what you need. And something that our culture does not understand at any level is you think about, if I take that tree in 7 generations from now, 7 generations, what will that mean? So that my great, 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 great grandson or daughter isn't going to have that tree. And what does that mean? Whereas now it's just like, I want that tree and I want it now. I want that burger and I want it now. I want this and I want it now. There's no sense of relationship and there's no sense of extended time. And so what we've done by killing initiation, by killing the sacred, by killing feminine tones, we're actually killing ourselves. So for example, since I was in college in 1969, the number of women assaulted and or raped on a college campus, the number is 1 in 4. And almost everybody knows that number. But they aren't aghast about that number. What kind of a culture allows 25% of their women to be assaulted or raped? I think the number is something like 1 in 8 women in the United States reports being assaulted or raped.
1 in 8?
1 in 8. What kind of a culture allows that? Well, we're not saying a bad culture. We're not judging it. What we're saying is an uninitiated culture. A man who does not understand his own feminine, that inside there are aspects of me, compassion and kindness and love and cherishing and savoring in the sacred. If I don't understand that, if I don't appreciate that, then a woman is just a toy. And the earth, which everyone around the world calls Mother Earth, never Father Earth, Mother Earth, it extends out to, then Mother Earth is simply a toy as well. And that's what we're saying, is that not bad men, but uninitiated men and uninitiated women, but I can only speak for men since I am one, uninitiated men are destroying the world and all things feminine simply because we don't understand it within ourselves. And that was the horror. That was the horror of these ancient cultures. That someone who said, I don't love me, I can't even be kind to me, that they would find it easy to lie and to cheat and to harm anything and everything else. See, men, when they're out of balance, hurt men and women and nature. Women who are out of balance hurt themselves. Women cut themselves more than men. Women have more eating disorders than men, that kind of a thing. Women take it out on themselves. Men take it out on everything else, kind of first.
Now, I think, when we talk about the masculine and the feminine, there's a lot of acceptance of the concept that you can't be both, that if you're going to be a masculine guy, if you're going to be a guy's guy, then you're not going to have an in-depth relationship with your feminine side. You're not going to be somebody who's sensitive. You're not going to be somebody who is concerned about women's issues or treating women fairly or, being a balanced individual from like the perspective that you're talking about. But in your experience, that's not the case. It seems to me just from our conversations that you can be a masculine individual and still have
feminine tones.
Feminine tones.
Yeah. Yes, of course. If you were to take any soldier, you would want them to not want to die, right? A whole bunch of soldiers that are willing to act crazy and just go be macho and die would mean you would lose the battle the first day. But a man who says, I appreciate life, and I even appreciate the life of my enemy, something else is going on. Something else is going on. When you appreciate life, you do what you have to do, but you don't become a sadist. You don't become one of the 5% of people in the army or in gangs or whatever that might be that enjoy killing, that enjoy wiping things out, that enjoy destroying. But when you see uninitiated men who just never consider anything as sacred, let's wipe that out. Let's wipe out all the gay people. Let's wipe out women. Let's wipe out those brown people or those black people or those Muslim people. That's the horror. That's when a Hitler appears or a Stalin appears, that narcissistic, it's about me, I'm out of balance, it's about being this macho beast. That's the greatest horror.
So just to understand, so a person who values their own life isn't necessarily going to be in touch with the total feminine perspective. They may still be abusive to women or accept sexual assault on women and just look at that as part of society. They may be very selfish and just appreciate their own life and want to survive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what's the correlation then? How do you extrapolate that into caring about other people besides going from just being selfish?
Right. So I think if we take the most extreme on the far side, where a man is macho and all that means on the extreme, they don't even care about their own life. And so that's when you have these people who end up ultimately killing themselves. The next line down would be those ignorant men who think they can take whatever they want, but not understanding the trees breathe through for us. Mm-hmm. That you actually need water to drink. But in their either naivete or stupidity, they're actually killing themselves too. It may take longer, or maybe it won't kill them, but it'll kill their great-grandchild, which is where we're headed now. Uninitiated men saying, let's use all the oil that we want. Let's kill all the forests that we want. That's that 7th-generation piece. The next step down would be that a soldier or any human being, any man, would be less violent toward the enemy or toward the other, being nature or a woman. And then to that initiated man that sees everything as sacred and says, I have to go to war because of something I believe in strongly and deeply, and I don't want to kill you. Please stop it. But the enemy has that same belief, and so there you go. But it's not joyful to kill anyone. There've been most important studies done by the Army, which shows that Civil War, World War I, even World War II, only about 25% of soldiers could kill the enemy. 75% of soldiers would rather be killed than kill the enemy. It was a problem. It was a problem that they had to study and figure out, what do we need to do differently to train people to be able to kill? It became an art form that even as recently as the 1940s, we didn't know how to do.
When you go back to your example in the beginning that you were talking about where a young boy would raise a fawn and then kill it and make sure that all the parts were used. But when you go back to that example, how does that not create somebody who's a sociopath?
In a perfect world, or in their understanding, because of the relationship that was established, sociopaths cannot establish relationship. That's one of the keys of sociopathy, is that you don't know how to do that. You have no guilt around the other. So by having them establish relationship for a year, and they saw that that young boy was establishing relationship, that would wipe out that idea right there that once they killed the deer, they would enjoy it. True relationship is about love and care again and the sacred. You're worthy of nonviolence. The idea then being that the next time again that boy went hunting, he would remember the deer that he loved and killed and would go, I've got to kill this deer for my family, but I'm not going to enjoy this. In fact, in many native cultures, they would pray for the soul of that deer, either before they killed it or right after they killed it. They would offer forgiveness for themselves. They would ask for forgiveness, or they would ask the deer for forgiveness, and they would leave a piece of the deer as an honoring to the spirits, not just take the thing. But everything was done with a sense of the sacred. That's my working and living with Native people is where I learned a lot of the way that you establish relationship with the sacred. It was something that I didn't know. I had great parents, and I was raised a Catholic and all of that, but I never understood, deeply understood, and never practiced the sacred act because I I didn't know it till I worked and lived on the reservation.
Just wasn't a part of your upbringing.
No, and I lived on a lake in summertime, and I loved the lake. I loved water skiing, but it was the sense that everything is alive. See, that's the difference. Where I loved the lake because it was a body of water where I could water ski and swim. But after living with Indigenous people, I saw, realized, felt on all holistic levels that the lake was a living being that actually loved me, which just sounds so crazy and new agey, but it's not. When you understand that not only are you establishing a relationship with the deer, but it's establishing a relationship with you, or a lake, or whatever it might be. I remember one of my Lakota teachers, he said, "Did you ever have to pick up a stone?" And I thought about it. I thought, yeah, I've gone for a walk, and I thought, wow, there's a cool-looking stone. I need to pick that up. And he said, "Did you ever think that the stone actually wanted to pick you up?" And I'd never thought about that before. It was like a piece of my brain exploded. But see, that's the way Indigenous people think. It's a two-way street. It's not always this us to them, but them to us. But if we're not able to hear that voice of the other, if the other isn't saying, if we're not hearing the other saying, "You're sacred and I want to be your friend," then a lake is just a body of water in which you drive your boat and fill it with gas. Or a stone is just something you pick up and toss it away when you're done. Or a hunk of meat is something you unwrap and you eat and you never think about it again. But the way Indigenous thinking is that, again, everything is sacred and in relationship. It's a different way of looking at the world.
So, in your own history, what brought you to get to know the Lakota people?
I was in a small school in New Hampshire, and I was hired as the director of counseling. I had my doctorate. I had all of this school learning. I knew how to help young people. I wanted to help young people. It wasn't just a job. It was something that I had been good at years prior as a therapist and all. But this was my first directorship at the school. And I spent an enormous amount of time dealing with young people who were addicted to drugs, addicted to alcohol. We had a young man who assaulted, I know you're not going to believe this, but 50 women on campus. 50 women on campus.
Wow.
And I began to feel helpless. I had my doctorate, so I had all this learning, but all I was doing was sitting with these kids and bringing them to inpatient care and to the dean's office. And I could tell you stories you wouldn't believe about young people and the violence to self and others. I remember one young woman who was about 5 feet tall. She would drink a case of beer a day. People go, "Oh, come on." I saw it with my own eyes. I experienced it and felt helpless. So I went into a store one day, and this woman happened to be Lakota. We know them as the Sioux, which is not a name that's fully appreciated by the Lakota people. Lakota means the people, and they live in South Dakota. This woman said, "You look really terrible. What's going on?" And I was like, "Yeah, I feel really terrible. I'm feeling helpless. I don't know how to help these young people." And she said, "There's a man on the reservation, Rosebud Reservation." I'd never heard of it, of course. And she said, "You need to go live in that man's backyard and learn about some things. Maybe learn about yourself." And I had summers off at that time. So I said, "Sure." She gave him a call right away. And she said, "Hey, can this 39-year-old guy come out and live in your backyard?" And he said, "Yeah, sure. Send him on out." So I guess I was cult material. I don't know. But I got into my car and I drove out to the Rosebud Reservation.
In South Dakota?
In South Dakota, and lived in this man's backyard from May till the end of August. Next year did it again. And that's where I began to learn about initiation. I began to learn about all these things that I needed to learn personally, but that I learned that were able to help me work with young people and then design an initiation process for the dominant culture, to assist us in finding what the indigenous people had found. I was able to meet indigenous people from not only our country. We call them elders, but I had like upwards of 15 elders in this country from different nations, but also from South America, Australia, Africa. Most recently, just even last year, from Hong Kong, one Buddhist, one Muslim. So I've been finding elders who continue to teach me about what's happening to our world, happening because of uninitiated men, and what we continue to need to do so that we don't all die. I'll never see the end of our society. I'm too old. But my fear is that if I had a grandchild, that they would see it. So,
your first visit to South Dakota, when you first drove up, what was it like?
Oh, I remember sitting in my car looking at the reservation because, like every unfortunate white person, I had this idea that Indian people were happy and lived on rainbows and shot buffalo. I have no idea. I was just stupid. And all I saw were crashed cars and poverty and people who were suffering walking along the road. And I thought to myself, geez, I'm just going to go back home. I don't need this.
Yeah.
But then another part of myself said, no, that's not working either. So let's drive up to this guy's house, live in his backyard, do the difficult thing, and let's see what this is all about. So my first, I will never forget, it's like light bulb memory. I remember sitting there, that big question of, what am I doing? It just seemed ridiculous to me.
Because it doesn't seem like you're walking into a successful society
right.
when you're doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Like they're going to tell me how to be successful, and they're worse than I am. They're worse than my students are. But it's just that they didn't have money and we're dealing with it, and our students had money and we're dealing with it. So.
Well, and if you really unwrap that and look at it, I mean, this is a society that before they were westernized by force, basically.
Yeah.
They were pretty successful. And now functioning in our society, they're trying to adapt.
Yeah.
And
dysfunctioning in our society.
Hasn't gone so well.
Yeah, we took everything from them. Now, I'll tell you something really interesting. I remember sitting with one of my elders after about a month, and he said, you know how you destroyed us? And I said, I'm not exactly sure. I became good at listening to them versus telling them what I knew. He said, well, so you came here, and you split up our families. You put Grandpa and Grandma on that side of the reservation, Mom and Dad over there, and you took the kids to Pennsylvania. Then you took away our food, the food that we loved and kept us in balance. You killed all the buffalo, about 200,000 of them. We killed millions of buffalo. So our most sacred animal, you wiped them out. Then you told us we couldn't speak our language, or we would be beaten. You told us we couldn't practice our faith, or we would be beaten. And then you gave us this drug that we couldn't manage, alcohol. So you were very, very good at destroying us. And I was like, oh my God. So then he said, so look, all your grandparents live in Florida and Texas. All the kids are off at college. Nobody believes anything anymore. You're losing your language. He said, you don't even understand words anymore. And I find that as a professor to be true. Students don't know language anymore. He said, you don't have spirituality. What do you believe in? By the time you're 18, you all leave your religion. He said, your food is fast food. Now you're destroying your bodies and your minds. He said, I don't mean this in a bad way. He said, but what goes around comes around. You knew how to destroy us, but what you forgot is that now if you practice those things among yourself, you're going to destroy yourself. So he said, there you go. So we're sad. He said, we're sad for you. You're sad for us. You see us on this reservation, but we're sad for you. You have no tie to nature. You have no tie to God. You have no tie to family. You love your alcohol. You love your drugs. You don't love your language. He said, so we were here tens of thousands of years. You've been here 200. We figure you'll be gone soon. And we'll still be here.
Yeah, you may not be that wrong. So you didn't go there with the idea of learning about initiation as you now know it.
Right.
How did that unfold for you?
So I remember I was sitting by a fire. It's what you do at night. You don't watch TV or have cell phones or anything. The elders and their children and the children sit around fires at night, and the kids are off playing in the woods, shooting arrow grass at each other and all of that. I have tapes of this, actually, of just the joy and the laughter. And I remember I would be in wonder as I watched this. And one night an elder said to me, he said, you know, what you're going through is you're watching Sape. And I said, what's watching Sape? He said, you're awakening to wisdom. And they started laughing. And I said, well, why are you laughing at me now? And they said, well, we're not laughing at you. They said, but usually people go through their watching Sape when they're like 12 or 13. That's when they wake up to nature. They wake up to spirituality. They wake up to life, that you enter a new period of life, and we as elders help you. So you're 39, and we think it's funny you're having your watching Sape now, but we'll help you anyway. So that was the beginning of it. And so I said, well, what is this awakening? And they said, understanding, like this fire, earth, air, water, and fire. That's the great tempering. I said, tempering? What do you mean by that? They said, well, you people say, don't lose your temper, which means don't get angry. So you've taken a word and you've made it really small. Let's say we were to temper a sword. You take a piece of iron that's brittle and hard and useless, except maybe to clunk somebody on the head. But you put it in fire, and then you hit it with a hammer, and you put it in water, and then you put it back in the fire, and then you put it in sand. And they said, by the time you're done, you have this beautiful sword that's flexible, sharp, shiny, has a purpose, on and on and on. They said, and that sword is now tempered. And that's what we do to young people. We temper them. We help them through earth, air, water, and fire to become young men and young women of balance, so they can go into the world really sharp and flexible and ready to deal with the world, not unidirected, not naive, not destroyed by their culture, not destroyed by I am what it is and I want it now, that a tempered person thinks about what's coming in the long term. So do you want to know about that? And so that's what you have to do, is show interest. And then I would go, of course. And then they would begin to teach me. So I was able to participate in tempering ceremonies, like the Sweat Lodge, like Sundance, Luampi ceremonies. I was able to really experience this earth and air and water and fire, to really experience what it means to become tempered. Now, the problem with that is that you start to feel guilt, you start to feel embarrassed, you start to feel like, why didn't I learn this before? And they would say, it's not about blaming anybody, including yourself. You're learning it now. So there you go. And what you can do then, your responsibility now is to teach it to young people, so they don't have to be 39 when they reach their watching Sape. They can learn it at age 12 or 13 or 17 or whenever you do that intervention. So they were not about judging. They were not saying white people are bad, at least the elders that I worked with. Mm-hmm. There was never that judgment or that assessment. It was, we all make mistakes, but we have all this wisdom to share with you. Do you want it? And I would say, of course I do. They would say, all right. And then that's how it proceeded. It was years. I've been doing this now for 30 years and never stopped the learning, never stopped meeting elders, never stop understanding this tempering, and then creating processes that work for dominant culture people. We can't take Indian practices and put them in the white culture.
Right.
But the basic tenets you can. That's the key.
So it's pretty neat that you started this when you were 39.
Yeah.
So the idea that you can't, that if you don't learn these things while you're younger, that it's too late.
Yeah, it's never too late. It would be better, if you could learn them earlier, because by the time you're 39, you do a lot of stupid things that don't have to have happened. You don't have to kill the things you killed or wound the things you wounded, and so that's the sad part, I think. But again, that does you no good to grieve about all that stuff. All you can do is take a breath and go, I'm gonna do something different now.
So the process of learning that what you learned from the Lakota people, it's a lengthy process. It's not like what we've come to expect today, where everything is at our fingertips, and if you can't absorb it in the next 35 minutes or an hour, then it's not worth doing.
You're exactly right.
It took some time.
You're exactly right.
So what was that process like?
To take it to our culture, for example, in order to teach a man to appreciate women so that he doesn't assault them or rape them is a process. Jung, in his way, and using some of my own language, if you will, he has a 4-step process. Now, the word process is key. When a young man says, there's no woman inside of me, like I'm sure some men listening to this are going, oh, there's no woman inside of me, and this is New Age crap, when it's actually very old age. What he sees is all women as sluts or goddesses. College young men, they hope there's a lot of sluts around, but they want to marry a goddess, you see. And one of the ways I explain that to men is I'll say, all right, guys, come up with romantic terms for having intercourse. They can come up with about 4. Making love, having intercourse, going to bed. I can't even come up with
sleeping with somebody.
Sleeping with somebody.
It's not romantic, but I guess it's softer.
Yeah. It makes it softer. And then I'll say, so come up with the other ones, now the negative ones. And you get all the carpentry terms: nail, screw, bang, hammer, and then the farm ones, pork, and all of that. They come up with about 80. And they're laughing while they're doing it.
Sure.
And I allow them to laugh because it's funny at some level. But you say, look, what does that say? Those are all violent. And it's not about love. It's about having a woman. So look at the psychology right there, that you've learned all these terms. Yeah, but there's no yeah, but. And I'm not saying you're bad because you could come up with this list. What I'm saying is, look at that. Now, what I do is I'll have men on one side of the room and women on the other side of the room. And I have the men look at the women while they're doing this, and you can see the harm in women's eyes. Now, there's always some women that think it's funny too, of course.
Sure.
They've bought into it. But a lot of the women are going, look at, this is how you see us, as toys, as sluts. And the men actually begin to hear that from that point. But that's not going to stop them. All they've done is, Prochaska would say, you make them contemplate something that they've never contemplated before. So then that goes on for a while, where you teach them about their internal woman. You teach them what is compassion and kindness and gentleness. You take them into the woods and you talk about catch and release with fishing, or you talk about gardening, or you take them into a store and talk about how do you buy something for a woman. I mean, all of these different things that we might do in our culture to think about the other. At that point, then, the man begins to see a woman not as a toy, but as a woman, which is really a step up, believe it or not. They see them as a woman, as not as something to be had, but something, again, to respect more. You work at that level of the process, and that can be months. The next step up, then, is they begin to see a person. So my guess is a lot of men, they think of somebody who's a friend. They don't think of her as woman Fran. They think of Fran. And Yeah, they go, yeah, she's a woman, but it's not how you define them. You define them as Fran, you define them as Emily, or whatever it might be. There's a person there. Unfortunately, if you haven't learned the first two steps, you have a few women friends that you know their name, but still you have a whole bunch of sluts and goddesses. Again, look at magazine covers, album covers. It's everywhere. So that takes a good year to work through that process. And finally, and it's very, very, very rare, a man, when he fully, deeply, holistically understands that, begins to see a woman as himself, just like he sees the earth as himself. If I kill that tree that's breathing for me, I'm killing me. If I harm that woman, I'm harming me. Why would I do that? If I drink 10 beers, I'm harming me. Why would I do that? See it? And that's where the change occurs, is when it's ultimately, why would I do that? I'm sacred. You're sacred. Even the beer is sacred. Why abuse it? Now, what we do at college is you have new student orientation. You bring in some guy or a woman who stands in front of them for an hour and says, don't harm women. And oh, by the way, don't drink beer. And if you do, that's bad, and you may get in trouble, and that's a program. Programs don't do anything.
Right.
The first 2 weeks of school are when most women are assaulted and raped. It's the first 2 weeks of school where most people begin their drunken part of their life. Some 30% of college students could be diagnosed as having an alcohol problem or an alcoholic. 30%.
Wow.
Why as a culture would we want to destroy our young people? Well, they sow their wild oats. It's what we do. It's a good place to have fun. You learn about who you are. Really? No, you're learning to be violent to yourself. You're learning to destroy. If I could tell you, I was a dean of students, the things that students do to residence halls and to campuses, hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage that you, again, if I told the story, people would go, oh, come on, you would never believe it. But the things that young people do, not because they're bad, because they're uninitiated. They don't understand that when they're harming all these things, they're harming themselves. Why does tuition go so high? Well, you destroy the residence hall that we now have to rebuild. It's that kind of thing. What goes around comes around.
Is that a process of self-initiation? I mean, do people learn from that? I mean, my own experience, I used to drink a lot when I was younger. Mm-hmm. And, we all do things that we regret. And then over time, by no means anywhere near a perfect being at all, but over time I've learned that I don't want to behave in certain ways. I don't want to abuse alcohol to a certain point.
Yeah.
I don't want to treat people badly. And I don't think I was ever a monster, but I certainly did a lot of things that I regret, and I'm definitely wiser for it now, but I still have a lot to learn. Is that a similar process? Is it something we do for ourselves, or is it just very different, and that's just learning not to?
I think it's a great question. I think it's individual. I think there are some people who are more adept at learning from their mistakes. It's unfortunate that you have to make all these mistakes and maybe hurt people in the process.
Yeah, definitely.
But I can tell you, it's not only what doesn't have to happen, but what could be. And that's maybe the most important lesson that I learned on the reservation. The amount of time that we waste being violent to ourselves and others. And that doesn't mean you can't have fun eating too much pizza or having too many beers once in a while. I mean, really. But it's that we aren't experiencing what we could experience. We aren't appreciating what we could appreciate. We really aren't helping the generations ahead of time to have what we have. In our selfishness, in our smallness, we're not really experiencing one of the keys of the holistic model, the spiritual world. And I'm not talking about God and religions. People sometimes get that confused. I'm a good Catholic or I'm a good Muslim. What is this guy talking about? again, talking about spirituality, meaning relationship. So one of the things that I do when I teach this process of initiation, having people establish a relationship with a tree, like I'm doing that right now in a class I'm teaching at WPI. In the first week, and I have students write a paper each week about it, a 2-page paper. In the first week, even the first 2 weeks, they're like, this is embarrassing, this is awful, this is stupid, I'm not a tree hugger.
Right.
But by the third and the fourth week, they're enjoying sitting with their tree. They can hear the tree calling them. By the fifth week, they're picking up all the garbage around the tree because they're afraid the tree can't breathe because of all the garbage that's around it. They're starting to have experiences where they think the tree is talking to them. They start bringing their friends to the tree, and the friends are enjoying that. In the first week, their friends thought that they were crazy. My point being, again, that just within 5 weeks now, the relationship that they have established is incredible with themselves, with nature, and now with their friends. They're calling their parents, telling them about things they haven't talked to their parents in a long time. They're telling their parents about relationship with a tree. Of course, mom and dad think they're nuts at first until mom and dad find out more. Then mom and dad are going outside and having an experience with a tree. It just goes out like that. The ripples just go out. And it's because we're all aching to be initiated. We're all aching to be in relationship. We just don't know how. The number of people under the age of 12 committing suicide has doubled.
Under the age of 12?
12 has doubled. And it's because of, the belief is, because they don't know how to establish relationship. They're already on their phones. They're already staring at things. They're already learning too much, things in their brain that shouldn't be in their brain, be it pornography or suicide. Developmentally, they're not ready for that. But there you go. Again, it's where are they learning most of their world from? It's not from parents. It's not from church. It's not from elders, not from grandpa and grandma. It's from the phone. It's from the internet, which isn't a bad thing. I love technology. But again, it's use and abuse. It's at what age? What are we doing? So the numbers are telling us we're doing too many things wrong. We're not helping young people understand relationship.
Well, when you start talking about the abuse of technology with kids, it's, you've mentioned that if a couple times that if you told us about your experiences with people and the abuse that they do to themselves, we wouldn't believe it. If we heard your stories of being a dean of students and the abuse people do to their facilities, we wouldn't believe it. But I think the amount of abuse that kids are, I guess at their own hand, but it's with permission of adults, or the adults are just completely enabling kids to lose themselves absolutely in technology. It's, people wouldn't believe it if you told them about it, and they don't see it, because we see it all the time. There are kids at the age of 1 and 2 and 3 years old who are completely dependent upon technology to establish relationships with other children or just with AI, 100%, and we see it all the time with iPads and cell phones being available to toddlers and all the way on up through all the ages of youth. But it's beyond even my own ability to understand or express.
The brain is fascinated by things that move fast, that are colorful, that are ever changing. But that's just a drug.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, we see children that don't go outside at all, and when they have social time with other kids, it's all reliant on technology. Coming home and seeing our own kids as teenagers and older teenagers, with 3 or 4 of them sitting in one room, and they're all just on their phone. And they're socializing with each other silently, I guess, through the technology and with other people. Right. But now seeing younger children, and we see it all the time at our other business, which is a restaurant. We see families sitting there with everybody on their phone. And it's almost cliche to talk about nowadays. But I can't imagine the impact that it's already having. When you talk about kids under the age of 12 committing suicide, you start to think, how does a kid under the age of 12 even know how to commit suicide, much less
I can give you
desire?
If you're interested, it's a pretty bad horror story, but it can give you an example. That was one of the most frightening examples for me of how technology changes things. And people are going to say, well, that's such an extreme story. But I could sit here and tell you 25 extreme stories just like that. I had a young woman come into my office one day, and she said, so I want to tell you about something, Dr. B. She said, my boyfriend wants me to go to Cuba and have my arm removed. And I was like, what? You know, like as a therapist, you're supposed to just kind of sit there and calmly reflect feelings or whatever. And I was like, what? She said, yeah, he wants me to go to Cuba and have my arm removed because he would find that sexually exciting. And I said, I'm don't even understand. And you're actually considering this? And she said, well, yes, I love him. And he found pictures of women on the internet without arms and legs and got turned on, so he wants me to do that. Long story short, I got him to come in, and I said, you have got to tell me what's going on. So just like so many people, he started looking at pornography. And level 1 pornography was exciting, but then he got inured to it because people get used to having 2 beers and then they need 3. Or looking at pornography and, well, that doesn't excite me, so let's go to the next level. And the next level, and the next level. And at some point, he found a site where there were amputees, and he got so excited, so off the wall excited, that he had to have this. He could think about little more than that. It controlled his being able to be a student and a human. So he actually asked his girlfriend, I would love it if you would go to Mexico, or to Cuba rather, and have your arm removed, because I would find that really exciting. Now, because she's not an initiated female, in other words, she didn't learn masculine tones like, say, of assertiveness or whatever it might be, and she wants to be accepted and not rejected, she was actually considering it. Now, most of her knew that that probably was wrong and not a good idea, but enough of her was touched by that she came in and had to ask. This young man never would have found that he was turned on by people making love or having intercourse with amputees if it weren't for technology. Again, not saying technology is bad. It's the abuse of it.
Yeah.
When I first started doing presentations on pornography way back in 1995, I remember standing in front of a crowd going, did you know there were 36,000 porn sites? And people were aghast, because there was like 3 magazines out at the time. Now there's millions of porn sites. I think, if I'm not mistaken, a significant portion of the internet are porn sites. And so it's just so easy to find. And young people at college, 4 to 9 hours a day. That's another addiction. But it's an addiction that kills the soul.
4 to 9 hours a day of
watching pornography. Yeah.
Predominantly male.
Yes. Women too, but not to the extent that men. And unfortunately, pornography kills the soul. It kills your ability to establish relationship because, again, you don't see a woman as a woman, just a toy, cut off your arm, whatever it might be. And then the amount of guilt that men feel when they look at it. They know, their soul knows that this ain't good. So there's violence to self, violence to others. It's just a vibration. Again, sounds new agey and silly, but Indigenous people talk in terms of vibration. Mm-hmm. That we live in a toxic vibration right now. And I think a lot of people would say that things aren't really balanced, don't feel good. And it's because there's just a lack of balance. There's too much toxicity, too much lying, too much pornography, too much violence, too much lack of acceptance, not enough relationship, racism and misogyny, and our soul knows this ain't right.
It seems, though, that, we're talking about technology like it's the like it's the catalyst, but I don't think it is. I think that technology is just enabling what was already happening. So if you go back and you think about the 80s, the 80s were the beginning of the me generation. And it seems like we're just continuing that. It's just getting, our social circles are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and now it's literally one person. You know, watching in our business, we get to meet a lot of younger people, and it's a very different world than the world I grew up in, which, you know, you're only talking, what am I, 47, so it's 30 years ago. I was a teenager, and people went out on dates, and you had social gatherings where you got together with other people, and, you know, you'd drink or do other things, whatever it would be. Go places. I remember going to concerts a lot, and we would just go do stuff, whatever it was. And now we watch these kids, these teenagers and young adults, and you don't see people going on dates. You don't see the social interaction. They still get together from time to time, but it's very different. And I think that to blame the technology and to say that it's the problem, I think it's probably not accurate. I think it makes it so much easier.
Yeah, I agree with you. I love technology. I don't think it's the problem. I think it's just another potential way of getting addicted. I love scotch. To have a good glass of scotch is a great thing. If I have 5 of them, shame on me.
Right.
You know. So I think with anything, it's use and abuse or the way we use something. One of the ways that I have proven in our culture that this process of initiation works is a number of years ago, I was at a university where a fraternity of, I think it was about 75 guys, but they were really misbehaving badly, and the university was going to shut down this fraternity, just like wipe it out. There was the incoming pledge class of about 28 guys. So I said to the dean, let me live with these guys in their fraternity house for 1 year, these 28 guys. And I'll prove to you that just by having mentoring and this initiation process that we can change things. So they said, okay. It was really a great dean at that time, vice president. She agreed. So lived in this residence hall, but it was a house, a fraternity house with these 28 guys. Now, at first, the parents didn't like it. They were like, you know, you're treating my boy badly, and the young men didn't like it. They were doing everything they could. And I said, look, guys, you were going to be shut down. So here's your option. You can live with me and follow this painless process, or you can go live in a residence hall. I don't care, but your decision right now. So the very first week, they were breaking windows and puking everywhere and doing the typical fraternity house stuff, if you will. And what I said was, well, you guys are going to have to go downtown and get glass and fix the window, and you're going to have to clean up the puke. Well, we don't have to do that. And I said, well, no, you signed a piece of paper saying that there's not going to be anybody coming in here to clean this house. You're going to clean it. And there were other things, like they had to meet as a group of young men every week. They had to, in small groups, go through this passage process where we talked about feminine tones and what it means to be a man, what is character, what is integrity, all of these different things. So after about 2 weeks, they started to get the picture. They stopped the puking because they knew they would have to clean it up. They stopped breaking things because they knew they were going to have to pay for it. By the end of the year, looking at all the markers, that fraternity house, which had been the worst on campus, was voted by campus security as the safest place on the entire campus. Was voted by the campus maintenance department, which never had to come in to clean it up, except once a week came in just to check to see how many diseases were being transferred. Decided it was the cleanest place on campus. The men had the highest GPA of any fraternity on campus. They were called the bad boys of this school, and that the prediction was none of them would graduate because they had a terrible graduation rate. All of them graduated. 3 became captains of their varsity team. Women on campus voted it to be the safest place on campus. There was only one write-up of all of the 28 guys in the fraternity. So in other words, in 1 year, by learning this process, they changed. They significantly stopped drinking, stopped using drugs, and performed, and actually generalized that into moving forward as they got great jobs and in life have been very successful, whereas they saw themselves as failures, were violent to themselves and everybody else.
So they improved in all of those aspects, yet they were still captains. They still played sports. They still enjoyed their lives.
Yeah.
So they're not mutually exclusive. You can be a decent person and still.
Right. It wasn't that, they stopped drinking and all became... No, it was that they didn't get drunk. And because I said, I don't care if you go drinking, but you don't come back here drunk. Don't mess this place up. Don't destroy it. And they started to self-monitor. See, that's the thing. They were all like, let's keep this clean. Let's keep this neat. Now, what's fascinating was that they started to report that they kept their rooms neater. They kept their bodies neater. They were taking showers more often, that they took pride in their classes. They started to bring in tutors into the hall themselves. They, as a group of young men, cooked dinner for the dean of students, the president of the university. They cooked dinner for them. Then they invited their parents, and they cooked dinner for their parents. At the end of that evening, parents who, in the first week, hated me, literally were crying, going, you got my son back, or I have a son now that I never knew could exist. Fathers going, I see now what I could have been if I had been like this, like my son in college. Everything changed. And it wasn't that they didn't have fun and they didn't go on dates. And
right.
What happened was they weren't violent anymore to themselves or others. So it was, again, crossing that line where you feel regret or guilt or sick or whatever it might be.
And was it because of the standards you were setting? What else did you do while you were there? Did you have times when you would all sit and talk about these types of issues as a group? I mean, was it an ongoing process of therapy also as a group, or was it just setting standards?
So it was utilizing the basic tenets of Indigenous initiation, which is the mentor, me, establishing a relationship with each of the 28 guys, getting to know them personally, and showing them that I cared unconditionally, no matter what they did. To meet with them as all 28 guys, which was required at first, every Sunday night. So there you go with community, where they talked about the house and what was going well and what wasn't going well, what they liked about me or didn't like about me. So you had that sense of community. Then they all had to meet in small groups of 6 once a week. And that's where we talked to them about these tempering issues, feminine tones, character, integrity. So each week was a different topic, talking about great men in time and how they lived their life. So they started to have role models. Each of them had to have a mentor outside of the residence hall. So they had to pick a man on campus who they respected and meet with them once a week. And those mentors then would meet periodically with us in the residence hall with these young men. Then with family, they had to talk to dad and mom. A lot of kids came from divorced families or whatever. But we worked it out then with aunts and uncles or grandpas and grandmas, but establishing a relationship. We would take them on trips in nature. We taught them how to cook. So again, getting out of this macho college, you get drunk, you kind of go to school, you cheat, and you get by. Instead, it was taking pride in yourself, taking pride in your school, in your home, in your family, and living for something other than yourself.
See, to me, it seems like things oftentimes come back to tribalism.
Yeah.
And when I was talking about this with my wife the other day, and we were talking about racism, and I think racism, of course, it exists in many forms, and it's more out in the open today in a lot of ways than it has been in the past. But I just remember going back to my own time when I grew up here in Vermont and New Hampshire, and it's largely, I think we were 98% white and 2% other back when I was a kid, and now it's more diverse, but it's still a lot less diverse in a lot of other parts of the country. And so I left here, I think I was 18. I just turned 19, or no, I was 18. And I joined the Army. And so I left white, rural New Hampshire and Vermont, and I went to Anniston, Alabama to go through basic training. And it was my first experience being around people of color, other than I think we had a couple kids at high school, but they were very much part of the society here, and there wasn't a lot of cultural difference. And so going to Alabama and going into the military, it was a huge shock. And I'm sure that there was racism on the military base as well. But there was a lot more of assimilation because we're all in the same predicament. You're all basic privates in basic training. And I'm not saying people didn't see color, but there was certainly a bond that people formed pretty quick. And I remember every time that while I was in basic training, and then as I went on to different duty stations in the military, I remember you would find people that were from Massachusetts even, which of course is a state away, and it's a whole different world when you're here. And you'd be like, oh, you're from New England, we have a bond. And there was that common tie. And you'd be overseas and meet somebody from Vermont, and it would just be, we're brothers basically. Or you'd be in another place and you bump into an American, and we're both Americans, And you look at that and you see that the tribe thins, and it becomes what are the things that bond us? And in the beginning, if you're in a certain place, it might be color, it might be race, it might be ethnicity. But then as you get further and further away from your group, a lot of other things all of a sudden become much more important. And I remember being in Alabama, and when we graduated and we were transitioning, I was going to go to Korea, and everybody's going in different directions. This group, I think we graduated about 120 people. And there was this other kid from Vermont, and his name was Anderson, and he was Amerasian, and he was flying back to Vermont, and I was just so excited. This is a kid from the Burlington area, and here I am from Hanover, New Hampshire area, hour and a half apart, nothing in common at all. But at that moment, we were brothers that were flying back to Burlington Airport, and there was no ethnicity difference. There was nothing that divided us. And then we got off the plane, said goodbye, and I never saw the kid again. But, when we see, like you're talking about, the fraternity experience and getting together with these guys and giving them that tribe to be proud of, to be part of that community, I think we're missing that in so many different areas today in society. The things that bond us, when we look at tribalism, now we're looking at political parties, and you look at ethnicity, and there are these huge divides. But if you take those same people and you put them in a smaller environment, if you take away all of this noise and all of this, these other influences, and you give them some type of adversity that's not just manufactured through media and through, the social networks that so many people thrive in, and you sit them down in a small room and you take a group of 28 people and then thin it down to 6 or even one-on-ones.
Yeah.
It's a whole different level of relationship that we just don't see a lot today.
And just go back to how we destroyed the Lakota people. You thin the tribes, spread them out.
Right.
Or go back to Jung's model, that modified model that I talk about. Republicans are just sluts.
Right.
They're not people. They're surely not me. But if I get to know a Republican, if I see, oh my God, he's a person, and actually that's me, and why hate them, or, maybe we can get along. But yes, as soon as you create these separate tribes, as soon as the other group is just a bunch of sluts that you don't care about, and I use that term metaphorically, of course,
right,
then that's the problem. So the whole idea of the sacred, coming back to Republicans and Democrats are both sacred, and men and women are both sacred, and trees and people are sacred. But if it's only about me and what I believe and what I want now, and McDonald's promised me a burger in a minute, and it's taken 90 seconds, and now I'm pissed. Good Lord, we're in trouble.
So going back to your experience with the Lakota, you had some pretty, I mean, what people would deem, I think, as a pretty macho or masculine experience when you're looking at it from the outside. You've told me a little bit about your experience with, was it the Sundance? The Sundance. So can you tell us a little bit about that, what that was all about?
So the Sundance is a very sacred ceremony that a number of nations utilize. In the Lakota tradition,
And when you say nations, you mean
like
Indigenous?
Hopi or Dene or Anishinaabe. So there's, I think, 660, something like that, different Indigenous nations just here in North America. And a number of them have versions of the Sundance or the Ghost Dance. There's different names and all. But for the Sundance, basically, the idea is that a tree is prayed for 1 year with people who are going to Sundance. So you establish, it's like the deer, you establish relationship with this tree and you pray for it. And basically what you say to it every month is, I am so sorry, but we're going to be taking your life. But your life is not going to be wasted. We're going to move you to this sacred ground. We're going to put you in the center. You're going to be the center of our prayers for 4 days. We're going to pray through you to God. You represent nature. You represent God. You represent the mother. You represent me. You are the axis mundi. All of these things. And so you cut down the tree after 1 year, and you place it in the center of a large circle. And the men wear what's called a Sundance Skirt. It would be like it's a piece of cloth, but imagine it wearing just a towel. So that's a feminine thing, if you will, that a man is suddenly dressing in a skirt. So for me, that always was part of that idea of, here I am out in the sun, fasting for 4 days and 4 nights. I'm dancing in the heat, 100-degree heat, with this tree, doing this macho thing, when in reality it's a very feminine thing. At some point, a rope that's tied to the tree is tied to 2 pencil-like sticks, and those sticks are placed under your skin, which sounds like, oh my God, that's torture and awful, but it's really not. And the rope is tied to those 2 sticks. And the rope now represents the umbilical cord. Women don't usually pierce, it's called piercing, because they understand life. They give birth, they bleed each month, they have the umbilical cord within. So men need to do this. It's part of, from what my understanding was with my great teachers, was this was part of the initiation process, this understanding, this umbilical cord. And so you lean back and the rope straightens out and you can feel the pressure on your skin. But you see, you do this for a prayer. You say, I'm praying for all the people with cancer, or I'm praying for all old people, or I'm praying for the mother, whatever it might be. And there's a belief in many, many, many traditions that if your prayer is really pure, then you don't suffer. That's the paradox of it. So if somebody came in here right now and stuck 2 sticks in my chest, I would scream as loudly as anybody and go, oh my God, what are you doing to me? But when I have prepared, when I'm doing it willingly, when the sticks are put in my skin in a prayerful manner, and I remain in that meditation, then it's not painful. It's actually, you can feel the earth through the rope to the tree that's placed in the ground. You can feel the heartbeat of the earth. You can feel things. It's impossible to explain. You can be macho, but if you're macho, you're missing the whole thing. Then you're just dancing and you're looking around and going, I'm pretty cool. And then the stick moves and you're like, shit, that really hurt, you know? Yeah. But when you're in the state of meditation, when you're really with the feminine and the masculine, and you lean back at some point and the sticks break. It breaks your skin. It's just not some horrible thing. You actually don't feel it. You feel an energy change because you're not attached to the mother anymore. And so something changes in terms of energy, but now you've got something as well. So this so-called violent macho act actually is a very feminine act. It's teaching men how to deal with the mother, how to deal with vibration, how to deal with the love of a tree. So you actually understand sometimes that you've killed this tree, even though every day we go to lumber yards and stuff. But you realize this tree that you prayed for a year gave up its life so you could do this ceremony. It's really all quite moving and all very paradoxical. The things that you think are happening, actually something else is.
That was the culmination of a 4-day fasting experience, or that's part of it?
Yeah, so you prepare for a year, and then you fast for 4 days before you go into the Sundance grounds. So people who, in the old way, fasted for 8 days, you have 4 days of preparation and 4 days in the dance ground. So you fasted and prepared for 8 days. It's harder now because we don't live that way. So sometimes people eat and drink the 4 days before. And sometimes even eat and drink during the dance. But people who really deeply prepare and really want the full experience will fast for 4 before and 4 of, and sometimes even 4 after, so that it's the sets of 4, and will fast for 12 days and have a completely full experience of being with something other than, and it's a full watching sepe, if you will, a real awakening that you take then into the year, so that for the next year you can go even further into the experience.
So this wouldn't only be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. It's not like a bar mitzvah or something like that. This is something that people participate in more than once?
Sure. You make a pledge to do it 4 times, then you can do it 4 more. So there are people who have probably done 70 of them, and people who've done 1. But the idea is that it's your prayer, it's your way of moving through life as a sun dancer.
So in the Lakota tribe, you said that they talked about a person would start to make this transition, this awakening around 11 or 12 years old.
Yeah.
And is there a culmination of that? Is there a point where somebody is then considered to be, made that transfer into being an adult or to being an awoken person, or is it a lifelong
I think
process?
That's a great question. The more that I have studied initiation around the world, is that about every 10 years you go through another initiation. So at around age 11, 12, or 13, you go through what you can at age 13, because again, your brain only can understand so much developmentally, and so you learn what you learn. And then at around age 25 or so, you go through another version of it and you learn something else. So in our culture, see, what happens is that we don't learn anything. And then at around age 45, you go through what we call a midlife crisis. So a man wakes up one day and goes, oh my God, I have a wife, 3 kids, 2 snowmobiles, a boat, a house. How did I get here? And I'm half dead. I'm 45, and leaves everything. And what does he do? He goes and finds another 22-year-old. Out of some belief, some mistaken belief, he's this time going to do it right. But he hasn't learned anything. He's just Peter Pan. I don't want to grow up. Doesn't learn anything. So our midlife crisis is an upside-down watching sepe. You wake up, but because you still don't know what to do, you just repeat stupid. And that's the problem, when you just keep repeating stupid instead of getting wiser and moving into something else and something else and something else. And then having somebody who can move into that something else with you, because you can leave people behind, and that's painful too. You've moved, and they're going, oh, you're crazy. And you're like, that's really sad. So then you keep moving, and they leave you, or you leave them, and you just keep moving. Not that you're better. It's not about being better or worse, just something else, just something else.
It's a personal journey.
Yes, very much so. So it's nice to have somebody to move through that journey with, with your understanding and your caring, and you're both moving with the with. But if it's, I dislike you for what you're doing, or you're crazy, or you're nuts, or you're taking too much time, then it's not so good.
And that was a societal, when you say moving with, when you're looking at like the Lakota or another nation, it's a common journey for people. I mean, is this something that's talked about amongst themselves? I mean, do they discuss their own progress as a group, or is it just still personal journeys, but there are other people that are going along those roads?
So I'm only one white guy who can only explain my experience, but
Yeah.
my experience with the elders that I had was at the time in the 90s when I first was there, people kept saying maybe 10 to 15% of the Lakota people lived in a traditional manner. So the traditional people that I knew, yes, the husband and the wife moved together through things. They would do the fires at night with their children. They would do sweat lodges together. They would do the dance together. So there was this sense of we are moving together through this. Whereas in our culture, it's very much, well, that's your interest, honey. You just go do that, and I'm going to go do this. And we feel like this is great. I'm being supported from afar, and I'm really independent, but it gets you.
Yeah.
Because you just keep going farther and farther apart, and at some point, you're looking at each other going, who are you? Or I don't know your experience anymore, or you've moved so far ahead. So it can be lonely. I have to say, for example, the 28 men who I lived with in the fraternities, the other fraternities began to look at them as, you guys are crazy. You're not one of us anymore.
Yeah.
And that was difficult for those guys. They were like, what do we believe more in, what we're learning, or the peer pressure of the other fraternities? Why aren't you guys getting drunk? Why aren't you coming to the parties where the women come half naked? Why aren't you doing that? And there were times you could just see it was, which way do I turn? So it's lonely. But if an entire culture does it, then it's wonderful.
So with the Lakota, when's the last time you went back?
I try to go back every year, so I would say now it's been about a year. Okay. But I try to go back every year. It's not, I lived with them for months at a time in my early 40s, but because of my life and my work, it doesn't happen anymore. Yeah. But what did happen was that because of what I was taught, and I just got deeper and deeper into it, that I met Inupiat elders and Dene and Hopi and Anishinaabe, and almost every nation you can think of that would come and visit. An Australian medicine man came and lived in my home for 3 months rather. And we taught a class at WPI. So it's always there. So the Lakota, most of my elders have died now. The average lifespan of a Native American, unfortunately, is 45 years. So most of my elders died in their 50s, early 60s. So now I'm at the top of the food chain. But, I try to practice what they taught me. And like I said, I still continue to meet people, but things have changed. We continue to wipe out the Indigenous people, pretty high rate.
Do you see that their traditions are still being continued at the same rates as before, the same number of people by percentage, you think, of their communities?
I think it probably depends on the nation or the community. I'm seeing some that have fallen apart completely and others that seem to be going strong. So,
did you always feel welcome as a white man?
Yeah, every time. That's, at first you're looked at with suspicion just because, why are you here and who are you? But once they see you're sincere and once you are willing to listen, our biggest problem is our mouth, that you always listened instead of talking, and you shared things, and you always helped. Every day, literally every day, we would cut wood or break rocks or cook for other people. There was never this sense of it's about me and what am I going to do today. It was always this idea of working together.
Were you the only outsider there?
No, there were. At that time when I was there was one other young man in particular. People would come and go, and over the years, people would come and go. Very few of us hung on for these 30 years. We've remained devoted to it. You know, it's a hard road because even you're seen as kind of like, what are you doing? Are you a New Ager? Are you wacky? Or like I teach a class at WPI right now, the psychology of shamanism, and I have 28 students in the class. And at first it was really hard for them. And now they're going, why didn't we ever learn this as children? This is important. And it's not about how to be a magical person who heals people.
Right.
Shamanism being this relationship, this connection, this deep connection, with all things, respect, and the idea of the sacred.
So going into that, so when you talk about shamanism, so what would you define as a shaman?
Shamans usually are people who have a natural gift. So Michael Jordan has a gift as a basketball player. I can play basketball, but no matter how much I was mentored, no matter how many websites I read, I would still be a bad basketball player. So a shaman usually is born either it can be a lineage, a genetic lineage, or a learning lineage, but it's something, it's a gift. And your gift can be that you can prognosticate the future. You can heal people physically. You can heal them emotionally. You can find objects. You can work with nature. So shamans it's a generic term that it's because our language is so bad. In our culture, in the Native American culture, you might have people who work with herbs, people who work with these spirits of plants. You might have people that are true holy men and women who live a life that's one of holiness, and they are like a monk, if you will, almost constantly in connection with God or with spirits. You have people who are called interpreters. They hear things or are told things, and they interpret it to make sense. The Dalai Lama has oracles who take on the spirit of a Buddhist bodhisattva or whatever it might be, and they become that for brief periods of time, and he listens to them. So an oracle would be a version, if you will, of a shaman. But then the Dalai Lama says, well, I listen to them, but I don't do what they say because they come from that world. Mm-hmm. And I interpret what might work in this world or how maybe they can help me. So the word shaman comes from the Buryat in Russia, Siberia, Mongolia, that kind of area. But it's been taken on to meet anybody who works with the spirit world and helps nature or other people. So it's a bit of a misnomer, and yet it's all we got.
The fraternity, have you kept in touch with those guys, those 28 guys?
They keep in touch with me, not all 28, of course.
Right.
But I'll, once in a while, and that was a good 10 years ago now, they'll write and go, hey, I wanted to just say hi, and that I still think of how you helped me, and I've got this position now, or I'm happily married and have kids. So that's really kind of nice. I've had that with a lot of students over time. Probably a lot of professors do, but
yeah. So, these are very individual journeys that you've participated in and then helped to orchestrate some community level experiences, I guess, at the fraternity and probably others as well. Mm-hmm. And what you're doing now, even with your class where people are forming a relationship with a tree. Can society change? Obviously there has to be an understanding first of a need and a desire, and then but is there a possibility that on a grand scale that anything can change, will change, or do you see it as just, we're doomed, destined?
We're not doomed. So one of the reasons that the Indigenous people were willing to teach me, and there's a movie called Yakwana, Yakona, Yakwana, and it has to do with the United Nations meeting in Brazil in 1992. And they didn't invite any indigenous people, so the indigenous people came and formed their own meeting. And what they decided was that they would have one man, Marcos Terena, come and speak at the United Nations gathering. And basically what he said was, we have the technology and we're willing to teach you what we know. Because you're wiping us out, which means you're the only ones that are going to be left. And you can wipe yourselves out, or you can learn what we teach you. So that's been the message to me all these years is, Tom, you're about the whitest man on the planet. You're never going to be an Indian, and we don't care. It's not about you pretending to be a Lakota man. It's about these basic tenets of being an initiated man, nature, and all of those things I've been mentioning. So they're willing to teach us that. Now all we've got to do is put it to practice. So like I've tried to put it to practice in classes or with fraternities and have shown that it makes a difference. But you see, the problem is that it doesn't make money. And that's where greed and lust come in. That people go, I kind of like this life where I get what I want when I want it. The one with the most toys wins, all of that stuff. So it's a very hard life to think in terms of 7 generations.
Right.
That maybe we only build cars half the size that use half the gas so that our great grandchildren can have cars and gas too. But with what we're doing, that ain't going to happen. So, yes, all of my elders have taught me many, many things. I could freak you out with the things that I know and have seen and witnessed that your radio audience would never, ever believe. So that could be for another time. But there are things that we can do and we must do or we're going to lose. So I think there's hope, and there's also sadness. One of the bizarre ones is that way back a long time ago, the indigenous people started to believe that someone called blue children would be born. Now, if listeners go online, they can look up indigo children. That's a New Age thing. But not all indigo children or blue children are this New Age thing. There's some science about it that, my goodness, there's a new kind of child being born that can heal themselves of AIDS or knows things that other people surely don't know. So the indigenous people said that we can not only change physically, like learn how to use our fingers and all of that, but we can change spiritually as well. And so young people with a new kind of spirit are being born. But here's the rub. They're so different and they're so sensitive that we immediately drug them. We call them ADHD or ADD or label them as depressed. Suicide rate is very high. It's because they don't feel a part of this. They actually feel the pain of the earth. So as a director of counseling, as a therapist, I could recognize these kids. You have young people that suffer from actual maladies that need therapy, that need diagnosis. But there are more that come to you that you can see that it's something else. And if you can deal with that something else, they can become our greatest leaders, our greatest teachers, our greatest hope. Or we can kill them off or let them become the super drunks, the super drugged, the super abused, because that's unfortunately what we're doing.
So when you're talking about an indigo child, this isn't a skin pigmentation thing.
No, it's about, see, again, it's going to sound corny, like what can I talk about? But in many cultures, they have chakras, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, just like the rainbow's a mirror of that. And the idea is that depending upon red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, located on your body, things that are root, things that are of the stomach, things that are of the heart, the throat. So when they talked about blue children, what they meant was blue children, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, that they were able to understand things and feel things that other people had to be taught, but they automatically feel it or see it, that they see the world differently. But how can we know that? Because they can't tell us that they see it differently. For example, I once knew a woman who remembers being a little girl, and she saw the world, and one day she got glasses, and she was like, damn, so this is what the world looks like. She had no idea that she couldn't see until you got glasses. So it's the same with the Indigo kids, that we can't see them except we go, boy, they're really different. They wiggle a lot. They deal with things too quickly, or they are in constant agony and pain. They must be depressed. We call everything bad instead of recognizing something as that's different. Maybe it's a gift that we need to fine tune, or we need to help them to manage. So it's a different way of looking at the world. And again, that's an indigenous way of looking at the world. They didn't have mental hospitals and all. They worked with the different and realized you're a gift.
Yeah, so X-Men comes to mind.
You bet.
That type of...
Sure.
Yeah.
All of the stories, the indigenous people say that the spirit world, and Jung says this too, the spirit world talks to us archetypally in our dreams, and it talks to artists in particular. So when you look at Star Wars or Harry Potter, they all have monarchs and warriors and magicians and lovers. Every culture has fairy tales. And the stories that are popular are the spirit world saying, here's where you're going. Well, right now it's zombies, it's death, it's video games where people are all dying and being killed and murdering each other. And people go, oh, come on. Well, again, I don't care if you believe it or not. What I know is that artists are saying there's something bad going on here. So you take Game of Thrones, how's this going to end? How's this going to end?
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. In 1890, medicine men of the Lakota Nation were interviewed by anthropologists, and they said, we're afraid that in 100 years there will be soulless people walking this country. All you got to do is look at, I think, our president and some of those people, and they can lie 20 times a day. They can create violence. They can, here's a person who's supposed to be the president of all Americans, and if you say something he doesn't like, you're given a nickname. You're treated badly. It's like, what? You're my president? You're Ocasio-Cortez's president, and now you're making fun of her?
Right.
That's the horror. This is where indigenous people go, yeah, you're splitting yourself up, and that's what you did to us, and you'll all die because you hate each other. You'll all fight each other instead of being the America where we're, we the people.
Right.
It's not we the people anymore. It's you don't think like me, you're the enemy. And we wake up evil in each other instead of waking up the good in each other. That's what indigenous people warned us about.
Yeah, it seems to me like the only thing that brings people together is when you have some common enemy. I mean, if you go back to the last time that we had a common enemy, it was September 11th. Mm-hmm. And that brought people together for a short while. And it's almost, other than that, I mean, I don't know what it would take to give a common cause again. I mean,
see, the indigenous perspective even of that was we didn't take a second. We didn't take even 1 second to say, wow, you must really hate us to have done that. What did we do? How could you tell us? Could you talk to us? Like, what did we do to deserve this?
Right.
But we didn't. Immediately was, like you said, we're all going to get together and go screw them.
Well, and if you ask, what did we do, then you're an apologist. That seems to be the...
Well, that would be a label.
That's the label, yeah.
Yeah, it could be, or you could be curious. It could be, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not agreeing. I'm just saying
I know,
it's...
yeah,
it's everything that is, I guess, questioning how did we affect the sacred, to use the terminology, is you're being soft, you're weak.
A liberal.
Right.
As if that's a bad thing.
God forbid.
God forbid you're a liberal. But, that whole Christian thing of turn the other cheek, or can you stay up with me for one night, or Father forgive them, all of these things. That's all Christian. And yet what we forget all that. Mm-hmm. Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. We sing every Christmas Eve. We don't mean it. We don't. That's the sad part. There's no authenticity. It's a lie. We're living a vibration of a lie. In Hinduism, there's sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. And we're Rajasic means you're really busy. And we're a really busy country. There's nothing wrong with that. But you can become tamasic, which is just filled with violence and hatred and narcissism and selfishness and lies. The time of Hitler, the time of Stalin, those were tamasic times. Or you can find the sattvic world of peace and caring and affection, but we can't hardly imagine that anymore. So we are Rajasic, and the sad part, we could move to tamasic, and then we'll be back in a world war again when we do that. So.
Can you give people an idea of what they can do as individuals?
Yeah, the very first law of initiation, which is don't speak poorly of yourself. That doesn't mean don't, like I said, I need to lose 10 pounds. That's a fact.
Well, earlier you said you were stupid at one point
Yeah.
in your life, and you're not being self-deprecating. You're just looking back and saying, I was kind of ignorant back then.
Yeah. So it's the idea of if you can be kind to yourself, if you can love yourself to the point of just not speaking badly, that's the first step. Because then it's easier to look at someone else and say they're sacred too, or to be able to look at a tree, or to look at a tree covered in garbage and going, gee, that tree is sacred, but somebody dumped cans all around it. Maybe I'll pick up those cans because the chemicals are leaking in and killing the tree. And if all the trees die, then oxygen won't be changed from carbon dioxide. So that means I'll die. So I mean, if people just think about life and the cycle of life, and that it begins with them and their breath, then something can change. But it has to begin that small. If we could just begin with that, I think we could go a long way.
And then what's the next step?
Then it really is moving it out from there to the golden rule, do unto others what you'd have them do unto you. So then it's kindness, compassion, understanding your own feminine tones and learning them, women learning masculine tones, and what does that mean? Appreciating nature, moving back into nature, establishing relationships instead of just the phone or just the iPad, but finding balance again, eating healthy. It just rolls forward in terms of these old words like integrity. And I ask students, what's the creed by which you live? They don't even know the word. They don't even know the word creed. You can ask people, what's taboo in your life? They don't know what the word taboo is. If you lose the word, then obviously you lose the behavior.
Yeah.
So if I don't know what a creed is, how can I have one? So you have to go back and teach the basics of language, and then what is your creed? What would you die for? What would you live for? What are your values? What are your hopes and your dreams? And how can you help other people live their dreams? See, the definition of freedom, maybe if you want to end with this, I go around, I give speeches at multiple universities around the country, and I ask faculty, parents, and students, I'll say, what is the definition of freedom? And to a person, the answer is, and I think maybe once in all of the past 15 years, but the answer is that I can do whatever I want to do, whenever I want to do it, as long as I don't hurt anybody else. See, and that's not freedom, that's anarchy. Freedom is defined in the Pledge of Allegiance. And so you can just see people going back into the Pledge of Allegiance. Right. It's liberty and justice for all. That's what freedom is. That when we provide liberty and justice for all, not just people, but trees and plants and animals, imagine that everything living without fear, liberty and justice, what a different world that would be. That's what I believe our forefathers, in their deepest soul, hoped for. They had their weaknesses and humanity too, unfortunately. But it's true freedom. But we don't know that we're bound by our fears and our lusts and our greed and our wanting more and wanting it now. So it gets in the way.
I guess the two things that I wanted to just find out a little bit more about in bringing what you know and what you've talked about into current climate, current society. One is redemption. Right now there seems to be, there's this whole culture of, I guess it starts with the prison systems, on up into social media and people in the public eye, more than people who aren't in the public eye. But when somebody does something wrong, it seems like a lot of the paths to redemption are gone right now. When somebody says something that they shouldn't say on a social media platform like Twitter or YouTube, or if somebody makes a statement in public, or if somebody commits a crime. And we talk about it as a society, well, you do your time and then you get out and you can reset, but that's not always true. You see people getting out of jail for minor crimes or major crimes, and it's tough for them to get a job. It's tough for them to rent a place to live. It's hard to rejoin society. But on a spiritual level, when you're talking about people who've done something wrong, people who've either abused other people, abused nature, or abused themselves, and on a spiritual level, when you're talking about respecting the sacred, and how can they begin that journey? I mean, I hear you talking about don't label yourself, don't say self-deprecating things, but is there a path to redemption for people? Do you think on that level? You began your journey at 39 years old.
The best way that I can answer that is the word becoming. When I first was at WPI, I would give the speech to all the freshmen, and the president of the university spoke before me. And he would say to them, "You're all adults now, and we expect you to act like adults." And you could see the fear in these kids' eyes. It was like, oh my God, I have just become an adult, and I'm responsible for everything. Right? And what that does is it means that the adults can go, they can point at a kid and go, "You're not acting like an adult. You're a bad kid. You're bad. You're not a good adult." So I sat down with the president. I really, truly did. And I said, "Could we change it to you're becoming adults?" Now, what that means is we understand you're going to make mistakes. And we as adults are becoming adults too. So we're going to move with you in the mistake making and learn from it. And the next year, he said, "You're all becoming adults, and we know that. And we are too, and we're going to move with you." And see, that's the redemption right there, I think. It's this sense of nobody's perfect, we're all going to make mistakes, and we're all in this together, versus we're above you, and you're the bad people. And as soon as I say in a classroom to a group of men, when I talk about sexual assault, you talk about sexual assault, and every man gets his hackles up and goes, "Oh man, here comes the talk again, and I don't do it." But as soon as you say, it's not that you're bad, it's just you acted badly, but it's because you're uninitiated, you didn't know any better. And suddenly there's a sense of redemption. Is that like, yeah, so teach me then. And I think for me, that's where it is. It's too late once you're already punishing, or you've named somebody or blamed somebody or labeled somebody. A sweat lodge in the Native American culture is a very sacred thing. And one day so my medicine man, he was a medicine man, so every day he did healing ceremonies in the sweat lodge. So one day he said to me, "Could you go down, you and David," there was a young man on the reservation, "could you go down and light the fire for the sweat lodge, because I'm going to be bringing an old woman down who's got cancer in about like 90 minutes. Sure. Now it was over 100 degrees, and the sun was real high in the sky. We lit the fire, and the only place that there was shade was sitting behind the sweat lodge, so that there was that little bit of angle where there was no sun. So David and I are talking. We're talking like we always did about everything on the reservation. Suddenly we smell smoke, and we stood up, and the entire sweat lodge was on fire. So we put it out, and just as we're putting it out, we see the medicine man walking down the hill with the old lady and a bunch of other elders. And our first thought was, oh my God, we're going to be killed. And they came in to the area where the sweat lodge was, and all they did was laugh. They just laughed and said, "What did you guys do?" And we're like, we burned down your sweat lodge. And they just laughed and said, well, let's rebuild it. And within an hour, it was rebuilt, and they held the ceremony. And that's the stupidest thing I've ever done, and probably the worst thing. And for that man to just go, no big deal. We all do stupid stuff. It made me realize throughout my life that when somebody did something that normally I would go, that was really stupid, I think about that moment, and then I laugh with them and go, you just didn't know any better.
Yeah.
Now, if you do it again, then I'll beat you, But the first time, no, So it's just learning from your mistakes, and redemption being forgiveness, and not being so anxious about everything. So.
Yeah, I see it all the time with, especially in this part of the country right now. I think all over the country, but with so much of a problem with these heavy-duty addictions, between alcohol and really hard drugs and these opiates and such, and other issues too. But all these crimes that arise because of those addictions and mistakes people make, and society doesn't let go, and people don't let go either, and that's the problem. It's you see a lot of guilt. I think similar to how you felt the moment after the sweat lodge went up. People they just don't let go. They don't forgive themselves. Yeah. And then society doesn't let go either, and that's a problem. And we got to find ways to allow people to make mistakes, and to if they have to go to to pay the price, whatever that is, if it's jail time or whatever, that's a different issue. But when they get out, man, there's got to be a way to just reset and start over emotionally and actually.
Yeah. In the Indigenous world, part of that's an actual spirit retrieval, that pieces of us leave when horrible things happen. And you can hear that in people when they say, I'm not myself, or I'm not complete anymore, or I'm not my whole self. And Indigenous people would say, well, a part of your spirit ran away, and you're filling it now with guilt, or filling it with alcohol, or filling it with drugs, or filling it with something else. You're filling that space. So they do a ceremony where you bring back a piece of that spirit, so that you can be whole again. Even the United States Army, as you probably know, with PTSD, they're doing spirit retrieval ceremonies for soldiers. So even the United States government is going, this is a real thing. It's not some New Age thing. It's very old age, and it works. So.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot of experimentation with different methods and, of course, drugs to try and give people a chance to sort of reset with PTSD. Yeah. I guess the other thing, just to go back to one last time, it seems like with the way that we're depleting our resources and global warming and the political climate and the division, there's so many negatives out there. It's hard to see a light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, Americans you see it on social media, people talking about wishing that there was a civil war, and of course these folks have no idea even what they're beginning to talk about, an actual violent civil war. Just the catastrophic nature of that and how horrific that would be, or anything along those lines. Yeah. But there's so much bravado out there. It's so hard to see just the possibility of people even having a common vision when you have such a huge gap in between ideologies, and people being so tribal and needing to belong to one or the other, and people in the middle eventually have to pick one direction or the other to go in. It's hard to see a way out. Yeah. And you talked about in the beginning, you were talking about in the future seeing the collapse of things, but also you see that there's a possibility of some sort of redirection of a change. But I guess seeking an answer for that, not that you have it, but there's the individual. I guess change begins within, right? You start if people take their own path. Do you see any of the indigo people out there that are getting to positions of leadership? Do you see people that are ready to make a change, that if there was support for them and their ideas, that it would help us to go in the right direction as a society? Do you see anybody that can bring together these different ideologies and at least find some common path, or is that not happening yet from what you've seen?
The only thing I can offer is that when I first learned these things, the students that I would see It's easy to determine who the indigo or the blue children were, or the ones that were the hope. And I can tell you now, they're near 40 years old, and in their businesses, in their work, and with their families, that yes, something is extremely different for them. And because they are supervisors, then everybody who works for them is living differently and impacted differently, which means their families are acting differently. So again, it's the ripples going out. If I were to mention names of people,
Right.
then it would simply be, well, you're partisan.
Endorsements,
Yeah, and I'm not going to do that because I don't know. But I can only tell you the individuals that I've worked with, and it's not because of me, but who I know are the blue children, who were helped, who could have gone down a bad path, are acting differently, and there is great hope. Some of them regularly meeting in groups of 30 and 40, really, with their children now, and you can just see the difference, creating a tribe, if you will, and not cornball stuff, but enjoying each other's company and talking about important things, having important men's and women's gatherings, and then barbecuing together and enjoying life and offering thanks to food when they eat it, things like that, or classes like we're teaching where students, they're changing, and then they talk to their friends and they talk to their parents. So if you could do this at every college, like, for example, did you know there isn't one college in the country that has as its number 1 or 2 or 10 goal, there will be no more sexual assault? I can't even see, after all these years, I cannot believe that there isn't one college. And see, what they do is they benchmark, and they all benchmark by Harvard and Yale. Well, if they're not doing it, it must not be good. So I have a program called Dare to be Benchmarked. What if there was a college who said, you know what, we're going to be the one that everybody else turns to, because we're not going to have sexual assault anymore. We're not going to have drunk kids. And it's not simply by saying, don't drink, you guys, and all of it's by teaching them to be people of character. You can change a culture on a college in 4 years, because by the time someone's a junior or senior, the words out of their mouth is, we've always done it that way, because they've only known that culture for 3 or 4 years. So you can change a culture, which means you can change a whole lot of things. And if women are not being assaulted, parents are going to be sending their daughters there and their sons there, and then other schools are going to go, I guess that's the way to do it. But it's not going to be until a college somewhere actually makes their number 1 strategic plan, we are not going to stand for sexual assault on this campus. And that doesn't mean we're going to punish guys. What it means is we're going to teach people to be adults of character and balance. That's the difference.
Yeah, but you have to acknowledge that it's happening at your school first,
That's right.
publicly, which
That's
they all
right.
acknowledge privately, if they're benchmarking it, obviously.
Yeah, they all know the numbers, but that's right.
Yeah. Well, and so without naming schools, you've worked with a variety. None of them have that in the plan for the future, though.
No, I have worked and or attended 18 different universities and have spoken at 75 different universities.
Well, that would be a nice start.
Yes, I would.
Yeah, because if you're doing that, then it only just pays forward to other things as well.
That's right.
If you can respect the feminine, then you can respect the sacred, and before you know it, you'll care about the future.
Imagine a school of 20,000 students, half that are women. That's thousands of women who wouldn't be assaulted or abused, who wouldn't be taking that wound into their life.
Right.
And the men who abused or assaulted them wouldn't be taking that wound into their life and their families and that future. Now take that by the whatever number of colleges, 3,500 colleges there are in our country. I mean, imagine that.
Yeah, but if you start with 1, that's it.
Yeah.
Just go there.
Start with 1, and then by year 3, you're going to have 10 because they're going to benchmark the success. And within, I think, a decade, you could have, because colleges are one of the foundations of our culture.
Sure.
And if you change that foundation of drinking and assault and violence, if you change that, you're changing the flavor of the way a country thinks about itself and the way it acts.
There you go. There's the bright hope.
There's the bright hope right there, yeah.
And we need that. All right. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you being here today.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking.
All right, there we go. If you'd like to learn more from Dr. Tom Balistrieri, you can email him at thomas@ragspassage.com. That's THOMAS@RAGSPASSAGE.com. Well, there we go. Episode 2 of Radio Free New Hampshire. Thank you very much for listening. Please check us out again soon. Don't be a stranger.